Hello, my good friends. How are you today? May God bless you all. I will not introduce anything. You guys watch the video and feel it. Then let's evaluate together. The rain was coming down hard outside the Rusty Note, a dive bar tucked into a crooked corner of New Orleans' French Quarter. It was April 2nd, 2025, and the air smelled like wet asphalt and spilled beer, with a faint whiff of magnolia blossoms sneaking in from somewhere down the street. Inside, the place was a mess of chipped wooden tables, flickering neon signs, and a crowd that didn't care about the storm rattling the windows. A saxophone wailed faintly from a street corner a block away, blending with the clink of glasses and the low hum of half-drunk conversations. Jack Sullivan pushed through the door, shaking water off his overcoat. At 50, he still carried himself like a man who owned the room. Broad shoulders, sharp jaw, a tailored suit that screamed money. But tonight his eyes were tired, shadowed from a day of boardroom bullshit at Sullivan Enterprises, the real estate empire he'd built from the ground up in Louisiana. 10 hours of shaking hands with suits who didn't give a damn about his ideas, nodding through presentations that bored him to death, and smiling at investors who only cared about their bottom line. He was done. All he wanted was a drink and some quiet. The bar wasn't exactly quiet, though. A piano sat in the corner, its chipped black finish catching the glow of a Budweiser sign hanging crooked above it. A kid, couldn't have been more than 23, was hunched over the keys, fingers dancing like they'd been born to it. Dark hair flopped over his forehead, curling just enough to look messy but cool, and he wore a beat-up leather jacket over a faded t-shirt, sleeves rolled up like he'd just walked out of a garage band rehearsal. He wasn't playing anything loud or showy, just a soft, lilting melody that slipped through the noise like a whisper you couldn't ignore. Jack slid onto a stool at the bar, the wood creaking under him. "Bourbon. Neat," he muttered to the bartender, a grizzled guy with a saint's cap pulled low over his eyes. The drink landed in front of him with a thud, amber liquid sloshing against the glass. Jack took a sip, letting the burn settle into his chest, and leaned back, hoping the world would just shut up for 5 damn minutes. Then the melody hit him. It started slow, a few notes that felt like a memory he couldn't place. His fingers tightened around the glass. The kid at the piano kept going, weaving the tune with an easy confidence, like he wasn't even trying. Each note dug deeper, pulling at something Jack had buried years ago. He frowned, tilting his head, trying to shake it off. Maybe he was just tired. Maybe the bourbon was messing with him. But then the kid hit a run of chords, a little twist in the rhythm, and Jack's breath caught in his throat. It was his song. The lullaby he'd written 25 years ago, back when he was still a broke-ass dreamer with a cheap upright piano in a shitty apartment. He'd played it in the dark, late at night, for Sarah Bennett, the girl he'd loved more than anything. She'd been pregnant then, her hands always smudged with paint from her art, her laugh filling up the empty spaces in his life. He'd written it for her, for the kid they were supposed to have. But that kid never made it, or so he'd thought. Sarah had left him after a fight he couldn't even remember anymore, and he'd gotten a letter months later saying she'd lost the baby. That was it. End of story. He'd locked the song away, along with the piano, and built a life where feelings didn't get in the way. No one else knew that song. No one else could know it. Jack turned, slow and deliberate, his eyes locking on the kid at the piano. Up close, he looked even younger. Early 20s maybe, with a sharp jaw and a smirk that said he didn't take much seriously. His fingers moved over the keys like they were part of him. No sheet music, no hesitation, just pure instinct. The melody rolled out, soft and haunting, and then he threw in a little flourish, a variation Jack hadn't written, but one Sarah used to hum when she thought he wasn't listening. His heart slammed against his ribs. This wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. He waited, barely breathing, as the kid stretched out the final note, letting it hang in the air like a question. The bar didn't clap. Most of them were too drunk or too busy talking to notice, but the kid sighed, leaned back, and flexed his fingers like he did this every night. Jack set his glass down, the clink loud in his ears, and crossed the room before he could talk himself out of it. The kid looked up as he approached, eyebrows lifting in mild surprise. "Hey, kid," Jack said, keeping his voice steady, though his pulse was anything but. "That song you just played, where the hell'd you learn it?" The kid grinned, leaning an elbow on the piano like they were old buddies. "Didn't think anyone had noticed that one. My mom used to hum it to me when I was little. Said it was from some guy she used to know." He tapped a rhythm on the edge of the bench, casual as hell. "Why, you a fan?" Jack's mouth went dry. "Your mom, huh? What's her name?" The kid's grin widened like he was enjoying this. "You a cop or something?" "Something like that," Jack said, forcing a half smile. The kid studied him for a second, then shrugged and stuck out a hand. "Ethan Carter. Nice to meet you, mystery man." The name hit Jack like a punch to the gut. Carter wasn't Sarah's last name. She was a Bennett. But it didn't matter. That song, that little twist in the melody, the way Ethan's eyes crinkled when he smiled, it was too much. Jack shook his hand, grip firm, but his mind was spinning. Sarah had a kid who knew his song, a kid who might be... "You look like you've seen a ghost," Ethan said, pulling his hand back and smirking. "What's up? This tune mean something to you?" Jack let out a short breath, shaking his head to clear it. "Brings back memories, you could say." Ethan raised an eyebrow, clearly curious, but he didn't push. Instead, he gestured to the empty stool next to the piano. "You play? I could use a duet partner. Crowd's half dead tonight." Jack's fingers twitched. He hadn't touched a piano in years, not since he'd traded it for boardrooms and balance sheets. The thought of sitting there, letting the music pull him under again, was too much. "I'll pass," he said, smoother than he felt. "But you're good, kid. Real good." "Thanks," Ethan said, though his tone suggested he wasn't buying the dodge. "Guess I'll take that as a win. You sticking around?" Jack glanced at the bartender, then back at Ethan. "Maybe. Just keep playing that song, huh?" Ethan smirked. "Sure thing, man. Whatever keeps you tipping." Jack pulled a 20 from his wallet, way more than his drink cost, and slid it across the bar. The bartender, still polishing a glass, raised an eyebrow but didn't say a word. "The kid," Jack murmured, keeping his voice low. "What do you know about him?" The guy shrugged, tucking the bill into his apron. "Plays here a couple nights a week. Keeps to himself mostly, but the regulars like him. His mom's got an art thing downtown. Studio or something. That's all I got." Jack nodded, the pieces clicking together too fast for him to process. Sarah. An art studio. Ethan. That damn song. He turned back to the piano, where Ethan had already started messing around with a jazzy riff, his fingers flying over the keys like it was nothing. The kid had no idea what he'd just kicked up, no clue that the guy in the suit watching him might be more than a random barfly. Jack stepped outside, the rain hitting his face like a slap. The lullaby echoed in his head, louder than the storm, louder than the city. He'd spent 25 years locking that part of himself away. Sarah, the baby, the music. But now it was all crashing back, and he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just flipped upside down. He pulled out his phone, fingers hovering over the screen. He needed answers, and he knew exactly where to start. Hey, if you're hooked on Jack's story already, and I bet you are, don't forget to smash that like button and hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Drop a comment below. You think Ethan's his kid? Let's figure this out together. The next morning, Jack woke up to the sound of rain still tapping against the windows of his penthouse in downtown New Orleans. The city stretched out below him, all wet rooftops and blurry lights, but he barely noticed. His head was pounding, not from the bourbon, though he'd had plenty last night, but from that damn lullaby. It had looped in his mind all night, dragging up memories he'd spent decades trying to drown. Sarah's laugh, the way her paint-stained fingers used to brush his arm, the letter she'd sent scribbled in her messy handwriting. I lost the baby, Jack. Don't call me. He'd believed her. Hell, he'd had no reason not to. But now he wasn't so sure. He threw on a jacket, nothing fancy, just something to cut the damp, and headed out. The bartender's words stuck with him. His mom's got an art thing downtown. That had to be Sarah. She'd always been an artist, even back when they were scraping by in a one-bedroom off Magazine Street. If she was still in New Orleans, he'd find her. And if Ethan was tied to her, if that song meant what he thought it might, he needed to know. The Marigny wasn't far, just a quick drive past the French Quarter's tourist traps and into a quieter stretch of shotgun houses and funky little shops. Sarah's studio was easy to spot. A narrow building wedged between a used bookstore and a cafe pumping out the smell of chicory coffee and fresh beignets. The sign out front read, Bennett's Brush, in bold, hand-painted letters, with a splash of red paint curling around the words like a signature. Jack parked his sleek black Audi a block away. He didn't want her seeing him roll up like some big-shot asshole, and walked the rest of the way, the rain soaking into his shoes. Inside, the place smelled like oil paint and turpentine, with a faint undertone of jasmine from a candle flickering on a cluttered table. The walls were a riot of color, canvases everywhere, some half-finished, others bold and wild, all screaming Sarah's style. She'd always painted like she was fighting something, all sharp strokes and deep reds. Jack's chest tightened. 25 years, and it still felt like yesterday. She was at the far end of the room, adjusting a canvas on an easel. Her hair was shorter now, streaked with gray, but she moved with the same quiet confidence he remembered, head tilted, hand steady, like the world could wait for her. She didn't see him at first, too focused on her work, but when she turned, their eyes locked and the air went still. Well, damn, she said, her voice low and dry. Jack Sullivan, thought you'd be too busy counting your millions to show up here. He forced a half smile, stepping closer. Hey, Sarah, been a while. Yeah, no kidding. She crossed her arms, paint smudged on her elbow, and studied him like he was one of her paintings, something she wasn't sure she liked. What's this about? You lost or something? Jack hesitated. He'd rehearsed this in his head a dozen times on the drive over, but now, standing here, it all felt clumsy. I heard a song last night, he said finally, at a bar downtown. The Rusty Note. Kid named Ethan Carter was playing it. Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes, too quick to catch. Okay, and? It was my song, Sarah. His voice dropped, steady but sharp. The lullaby I wrote for you. For us. You're telling me you don't remember? She let out a short laugh, but it didn't reach her face. It's just a tune, Jack. Don't make it more than it is. Bullshit. He took another step, closing the gap. No one else knew that song. I played it for you, night after night, when you were... He stopped, the words catching in his throat. You hummed it all the time. And now this kid's playing it like it's his. Where'd he get it? Sarah's jaw tightened, but before she could answer, the door creaked open behind him. An older woman stepped in, late 70s maybe, with silver hair pulled into a loose bun and a glare that could cut glass. She carried a canvas bag slung over one shoulder, and her boots clicked against the hardwood floor like she owned the place. Everything all right here, Sarah? The woman asked, her voice sharp with a thick Creole drawl. Her eyes flicked to Jack, sizing him up like he was trouble she'd seen before. It's fine, Mama, Sarah said, though her tone said otherwise. Jack was just leaving. Not yet, Jack said, turning to face the woman. You're Maggie, right? Sarah's mom? Maggie's lips pressed into a thin line. And you're the hotshot who broke her heart 25 years ago. What's your game, Sullivan? You don't get to waltz back in here and play hero. Jack bristled but kept his cool. I'm not playing anything. I just want the truth. The truth? Maggie snorted, setting her bag down with a thud. Truth is, you walked out on my girl when she needed you most. Don't act like you've got a claim to anything now. Oh, that's not how it went, Jack shot back, his voice rising despite himself. She left me. Said she lost the baby and didn't want me around. I didn't walk out. I was shut out. Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. Don't you dare rewrite history, Jack. You were already halfway out the door chasing your big dreams. I just made it easy for you. The room went quiet, the tension thick enough to choke on. Jack's hands clenched at his sides. He wanted to argue, to throw it all back at her. But that song, that damn song, kept pulling him off track. Fine, he said, forcing his voice steady. Let's skip the past. Tell me about Ethan. He's yours, right? Sarah didn't blink. Yeah, he's mine. And that song? Jack pressed. You taught it to him? She shrugged, too casual, like it didn't matter. I hummed it when he was a baby. Calmed him down. Didn't think he'd pick it up. Jack's pulse kicked up. So where'd it come from, Sarah? You didn't just pull it out of thin air. It's mine. You know it is. She looked away, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. It's just a song, Jack. Let it go. But he couldn't. Not when every note Ethan played last night had felt like a piece of him, like a ghost he'd buried coming back to life. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Is he mine, Sarah? Is Ethan my son? her head whipped back, eyes flashing. You don't get to ask that, not after all this time. I'm asking anyway, he said, holding her gaze. Because if he is, if you kept that from me, I deserve to know. The door slammed open again, cutting through the moment like a knife. Ethan strolled in, shaking rain off his jacket, a grin plastered on his face. Yo, Mom, you got any coffee? It's a damn swamp out there. He stopped short, clocking Jack. Oh! Hey, it's the bar guy. What's up, man? Sarah's face tightened, and Maggie shot Jack a look that could have killed. Jack just stood there, staring at Ethan. His easy smile, the way he carried himself, that spark in his eyes. It was like looking at a younger version of himself, back before the suits and the money and the regrets. Jack was just leaving, Sarah said again, her voice clipped. Ethan raised an eyebrow, glancing between them. Okay, weird vibe. Did I interrupt something? No, Jack said, too quick. He forced a nod at Ethan. Good seeing you, kid. Play that song again sometime. Ethan smirked. Sure thing, mystery man. Jack turned and walked out, the rain hitting him like a wall. His heart was hammering, his mind racing. Sarah wasn't giving him answers, not yet, but he'd seen it in her eyes. She was hiding something. And Ethan, God, Ethan could be his. The thought hit him hard, a mix of fear and hope he hadn't felt in years. He pulled out his phone as he climbed into his car, the wipers slashing through the downpour. Claire, he said when his assistant picked up, I need you to dig into someone. Ethan Carter and Sarah Bennett. Everything you can find. Now. He hung up, staring out at the blurry streets of New Orleans. That lullaby wasn't just a song anymore. It was a lifeline, and he was damn well going to follow it. Things are heating up, huh? If you're dying to know what Sarah's hiding, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment with your guesses. I read 'em all. Stick around for the next part, 'cause this is just getting started. Jack's office at Sullivan Enterprises sat high above New Orleans, all glass and steel, with a view of the Mississippi River snaking through the city like a muddy vein. The rain had stopped overnight, leaving the morning air thick and humid, the kind that stuck to your skin. Inside, the AC hummed, but Jack still felt like he was suffocating. He'd barely slept, the lullaby looping in his head like a broken record, Sarah's voice cutting through every time he closed his eyes. You don't get to ask that. Yeah, well, he was asking anyway. His desk was a mess. Contracts, coffee cups, a half-empty bourbon bottle he hadn't bothered to hide. But he ignored it all when Claire Morgan walked in. She was 32, sharp as a tack, with dark hair pulled back tight and a blazer that said she meant business. She had been his assistant for 5 years, the kind of person who could find anything if you gave her a name and a deadline. Today, she carried a thin folder, her expression unreadable. Got what you asked for, she said, dropping the folder on his desk. Ethan Carter and Sarah Bennett. Took some digging, but it's all there. Jack grabbed it, flipping it open like it might burn him if he waited too long. Talk me through it. Claire leaned against the edge of his desk, crossing her arms. Ethan's 23, born August 15th, 2001, right here in New Orleans. No father listed on the birth certificate. Dropped out of Tulane's music program 2 years ago. Money issues, looks like. Plays gigs around town, mostly bars like the Rusty Note. Lives with his mom in a little place out in Gentilly. Jack's fingers tightened on the pages. August 15th, 9 months after he and Sarah split. The math lined up too damn well. And Sarah? She's 48, Claire said, her voice steady. Runs that studio, Bannett's brush, teaches art classes, sells some pieces, but it's not big money. She's been off the grid mostly. No social media, no big moves. Just her and Ethan scraping by. Jack exhaled, leaning back in his chair. No husband, no boyfriend. Nope, not that I could find. Looks like she's been solo since Ethan came along. He stared at the folder, the words blurring. Sarah had a kid. His kid, maybe. And she'd raised him alone, all while humming that lullaby like it was nothing. He'd spent 25 years building an empire, and she'd spent them building a life. A life he might have been part of if he hadn't screwed it all up. You okay, boss? Claire asked, tilting her head. You look like you're about to punch something. I'm fine, he lied, shutting the folder. Good work, Claire. Keep this quiet, yeah? She nodded, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Worry, maybe. Sure thing. Just don't do anything stupid, all right? Too late for that, he muttered, and she smirked before heading out. Jack didn't waste time. He needed to see Ethan again, needed to know if that spark he'd felt last night was real. He grabbed his keys and headed back to the Rusty Note, figuring the kid might be there setting up for another gig. The bar looked rougher in daylight, peeling paint, a busted neon sign flickering weakly. But the door was unlocked, and he stepped inside. The place smelled like stale beer and cigarette smoke, the kind of stink that never really left. A few regulars hunched over the bar, nursing early drinks, while a jukebox coughed out some old Zydeco tune. Ethan was at the piano, messing around with a riff, his leather jacket slung over a chair. Another guy, skinny, with a mop of black hair and a beat-up guitar case, was leaning against the wall, watching him. Jack started toward the piano, but the skinny guy stepped in his path, arms crossed. Hold up, man. Who are you? Jack sized him up. Early 20s, tattoos peeking out from under his sleeves, a glare that said he didn't trust strangers. Just here to listen, Jack said, keeping his tone even. Name's Jack. The guy didn't budge. Yeah? You the suit who was creeping around last night? Ethan doesn't need some rich asshole throwing cash at him like he's for sale. Tommy, chill, Ethan called from the piano, not looking up. He's cool. Gave me a 20 just for playing a lullaby. Tommy's eyes narrowed. That's so. What's your deal, Jack? You a talent scout or just some creep? Jack's jaw tightened, but he kept his cool. I like his music. That a crime? It is if you're here to mess with him, Tommy shot back. We've got a good thing going. Don't need you screwing it up. Ethan finally spun around on the bench, grinning like this was all a big joke. Dude, you're gonna scare off my fan base. Jack's all right, man? Jack nodded, meeting Ethan's eyes. Yeah, just wanted to hear you play again. Tommy snorted, but stepped aside, muttering something under his breath. Ethan shrugged and started up a jazzy little number, fingers flying over the keys like it was nothing. Jack watched, leaning against a table, every note hitting him like a memory he couldn't shake. The kid had talent, raw, real talent, and that easy charm that pulled you in, just like Sarah. When the song ended, Ethan stretched and hopped off the bench. So, what's the verdict, Jack? I passed the audition? You're good, kid, Jack said, meaning it. Better than good, Ethan smirked. High praise from the suit. You sticking around? Maybe, Jack said, then lowered his voice. That lullaby you played last night, your mom really teach you that? Ethan nodded, casual as hell. Yeah, she'd hum it when I was a kid. Said it was special, but she never said why. Guess I just picked it up. Jack's chest tightened. Special, huh? That's what she said. Ethan tilted his head, studying him. You're weirdly into this song, man. What's the story? Jack forced a laugh, dodging the question. Just reminds me of something. Keep playing, all right? He left before Ethan could push, but Tommy's glare followed him out the door. The kid didn't trust him, and Jack couldn't blame him. He didn't trust himself right now either. Back at Sullivan Enterprises, the air felt heavier. Claire was waiting in his office, her face tight. We've got a problem, she said, shutting the door behind her. Jack frowned. What now? Charles Decker and Ellen Hayes, she said, naming two of his board members. They're sniffing around. Heard you've been distracted, skipping meetings, asking me to dig into personal stuff. They're not happy. Jack rubbed his jaw, the bourbon bottle looking real tempting. Charles was an old-school shark, always looking for a weak spot. And Ellen was the type who'd smile while she stabbed you in the back. What are they saying? Claire hesitated. They think you're losing it. Charles mentioned something about stability, said if you're chasing some kid, you're not focused on the company. They're meeting tonight. Closed door. Jack's stomach dropped. He'd built this damn company from nothing, and now they were circling like vultures. They don't get to decide that, he snapped. I'm still CEO. For now, Claire said quietly. Look, I don't know what's going on with this Ethan thing, but they're watching you. Hard. He sank into his chair, the weight of it all crashing down. Ethan. Sarah. The board. He'd wanted answers, but now he was drowning in questions. Was Ethan his son? Did Sarah lie all those years ago? And if he pushed too hard, would he lose everything he'd built? I need a DNA test, he said finally, voice low. Ethan's. Get it done. Claire's eyes widened. Jack, that's... I know, he cut her off. It's a mess. But I need to know, Claire. Can you make it happen? She sighed, nodding reluctantly. I'll figure it out. But Sarah's not going to like this. And if the board finds out... They won't, he said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. Just do it. She left, and Jack stared out at the river, the city lights smearing into a haze. He was in deep now, too deep to back out. Ethan's face flashed in his mind, that cocky grin, those quick fingers on the keys. If he was his son, Jack had missed 23 years. If he wasn't, then what the hell was he chasing? Either way, he was about to find out. Man, this is getting intense. What do you think? Will Jack get his answers, or is he digging his own grave? Hit that like button, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear 'em. Next part's coming soon, so don't go anywhere. Jack's penthouse was dead quiet. the kind of silence that pressed against your ears. It was late, past midnight, and the New Orleans skyline glittered outside his floor-to-ceiling windows, all twinkling lights and dark water. He sat on the edge of his leather couch, a glass of bourbon in one hand, the unopened envelope from Claire in the other. The DNA test results. She'd dropped it off an hour ago, her face tight with something she wouldn't say. "You sure you want this?" she'd asked. And he'd just nodded, too stubborn to back out now. He tore it open, the paper crinkling too loud in the stillness. His eyes scanned the page, skipping the jargon, percentages, markers, whatever, until he hit the bottom line. No genetic match. Ethan wasn't his son. Jack let out a slow breath, the bourbon trembling in his glass. He should have felt relief, right? No messy past to untangle. No kid he'd failed for 23 years. But instead, there was this hollow ache in his chest, like he'd lost something he didn't even know he'd wanted. He tossed the envelope onto the coffee table and downed the drink, the burn doing nothing to fill the gap. Ethan wasn't his. Fine. That should have been the end of it. But that lullaby, his lullaby, kept nagging at him. Sarah had taught it to Ethan. She'd kept it alive all these years, even after she'd cut him out. Why? And why did he still feel like that kid was part of him, blood or not? The next day, he found himself back at the Rusty Note. The bar was half empty, the afternoon crowd thin and sleepy. But Ethan was there, tinkering with the piano like always. Jack slid onto a stool watching him. The kid had this way about him, loose, confident, like nothing could touch him. It reminded Jack of himself, back before the suits in the boardroom swallowed him whole. Ethan glanced up, smirking. "You're turning into a regular man. Should I start saving you a seat?" Jack chuckled, leaning forward. "Maybe. Got a question for you, though." "Shoot," Ethan said, hitting a quick riff without breaking eye contact. "You ever play anything bigger than this place?" Jack asked. "Like real stages? Crowds that actually listen?" Ethan shrugged, spinning on the bench to face him. "Nah, dive bars are my thing. Keeps it real, you know? Plus, Tommy'd kill me if I ditched our gigs." Jack nodded toward the empty room. "You're too good for this dump, kid. I've got a gig for you. Something big. Ritz-Carlton, downtown. Gala next week. Invitation only. Packed with people who could put you on the map." Ethan's eyebrows shot up. "The Ritz? You serious?" "Dead serious," Jack said. "I've got pull. One call, and you're on the stage." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, grinning. "Hell yeah, I'm in. But you're playing with me, old man. I'm not doing this solo." Jack blinked. "What?" "You heard me," Ethan said, tapping the piano. "You're obsessed with that lullaby, right? Let's do it together. Show these fancy folks what we've got." Jack's stomach twisted. He hadn't played in public since he was a kid himself, since his dad had told him music was a waste of time and shoved a business degree in his face. But Ethan's grin was infectious, and something about the idea, the two of them, that song, felt right. "Fine," he said, shaking his head. "You're on." Ethan clapped his hands together. "Sweet. Better start practicing, 'cause I'm not carrying you." Jack smirked, but his mind was already racing. Sarah wouldn't like this, not one bit. And Tommy? He'd probably lose his shit. But Jack didn't care. He wanted this. For Ethan, for himself, for whatever the hell was pulling him back to that piano. He didn't tell Sarah until the day before the gala. She was in her studio, surrounded by half-finished canvases, the air thick with paint and coffee. She barely looked up when he walked in. "Ethan's playing the Ritz tomorrow night," he said, cutting to the chase. "I got him the gig." She froze, brush hovering over the canvas. "You did what?" "It's a chance for him," Jack said, keeping his voice steady. "He's got talent, Sarah. He deserves to be heard." She set the brush down, turning to face him, her eyes hard. "You think you can just show up and play dad? Throw some money around and make everything okay? Ethan doesn't need you, Jack." "Maybe not," he said, stepping closer. "But I need him." Her jaw clenched, and for a second he thought she might throw something at him. "You don't get it?" she said, voice low. "He's happy. He's got his music, his friends. You're gonna drag him into your world and mess it all up." "I'm not dragging him anywhere," Jack shot back. "He wants this. Ask him." She shook her head, turning away. "Get out." He left, but her words stuck with him. Maybe she was right. Maybe he was screwing this up. But it was too late to back out now. The Ritz-Carlton was a different beast from the rusty Note. All polished marble, crystal chandeliers, and waiters gliding around with champagne flutes. The gala was packed with New Orleans elite, oil tycoons, politicians, the kind of people who'd drop $1,000 on a suit without blinking. Jack adjusted his cuffs, feeling out of place for the first time in years. Normally, he'd be working the room, shaking hands, closing deals. Tonight, he was just a guy about to make a fool of himself on a piano. Ethan strolled in like he owned the place, tossing a wink at a waitress as he adjusted his jacket, a cheap blazer he'd probably borrowed. "Nervous, old man?" he asked, clapping Jack on the shoulder. "I don't get nervous," Jack lied, though his palms were sweating. Ethan smirked. "Sure you don't. You look like you're about to pitch a merger to a room full of sharks." "Shut up and focus," Jack muttered, but he couldn't help grinning. The announcer took the stage, his voice booming over the chatter. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jack Sullivan and Ethan Carter." Polite applause rippled through the crowd as they stepped up, the grand piano gleaming under the lights. Jack's fingers hovered over the keys, stiff and rusty, while Ethan settled in beside him, all easy confidence. They started with the lullaby, slow, tentative at first, Jack fumbling the opening notes. The crowd murmured, and he felt the heat creeping up his neck. This was a mistake. He was a CEO, not a musician. But then Ethan nudged him, barely noticeable, and leaned into the melody, his hands picking up the slack. Something clicked. Jack let go, the music taking over, and suddenly it wasn't just a song. It was a conversation, a thread stretching back through years he'd tried to forget. The note swelled, filling the room, soft and haunting, then rising into something bigger, something alive. Jack's fingers found their rhythm, muscle memory kicking in from decades ago, and Ethan matched him, throwing in little flourishes that made it their own. The crowd faded away. None of the suits, the money, the power mattered. It was just them, the piano, and that damn lullaby tying them together. When the last note faded, there was a beat of silence. Then the room erupted. People stood, clapping, murmuring to each other, but Jack barely heard it. He looked at Ethan, who grinned like he'd just pulled off the heist of the century. "Not bad for an old man," Ethan said, clapping him on the back. Jack shook his head, catching his breath. "Don't get cocky." "Too late," Ethan shot back, hopping off the bench to take a mock bow. They stepped off the stage, the energy still buzzing between them, but Jack's high didn't last. Claire caught him by the bar, her face pale. "We've got trouble," she said, voice low. "What now?" he asked, grabbing a water. "Charles and Ellen," she said. "They're spreading word you're cracking, saying you're too busy chasing some kid to run the company. It's hitting the rumor mill hard." Jack's grip tightened on the glass. "They're full of shit." "Maybe," Claire said, "but it's sticking. And I heard Charles mention something about adjusting the narrative. I don't know what that means, but it's not good." He exhaled, the weight crashing back. Ethan wasn't his son. At least, that's what the test said. But he'd felt more alive up there than he had in years. And now the board was coming for him, ready to tear it all down. He glanced at Ethan, laughing with a couple of guests across the room. Blood or not, that kid mattered to him. And Jack wasn't about to let anyone, Sarah, Tommy, or the damn board, take that away. That piano moment was something else, right? If you're loving Jack and Ethan's story, smash that subscribe button and drop a comment. What's the board up to? Stick around, because the next part's gonna flip everything upside down. Jack stood in his office. The New Orleans skyline a gray smear through the rain-streaked windows. It was 3 days after the gala, and the high from playing with Ethan had crashed hard. The rumors Claire warned him about were spreading like wildfire. Whispers in boardrooms, snide comments at investor lunches, even a snarky little blurb in the Times-Picayune, hinting that Jack Sullivan was losing his edge. Charles and Ellen were behind it, no doubt, but he didn't have proof. Not yet. He was nursing a coffee. Black, bitter, no bourbon this time. When Claire burst in, her face pale and her hands clutching a folder like it was a live grenade. She shut the door hard, the click echoing in the sterile room. "Jack," she said, voice low and shaky. "We've got a problem. A big one." He set the mug down, frowning. "What now? Charles trying to stage a coup?" "Worse." She dropped the folder on his desk, her fingers trembling. "The DNA test. It was fake." The words hit him like a sucker punch. He stared at her, brain scrambling to catch up. "What the hell do you mean, fake?" Claire took a breath, steadying herself. "I got a call from the lab this morning. Someone paid them off to alter the results. Said Ethan wasn't yours when he is. I double-checked with a guy I know there. It's legit, Jack. Ethan's your son." Jack's knees buckled and he sank into his chair, the folder staring up at him like a loaded gun. "You're sure?" 100%, she said. "I've got the real results here. 99.9% match. But that's not all. I overheard Charles and Ellen in the hall yesterday. They knew about the test. They made it happen." His hands curled into fists, nails digging into his palms. "They did this?" Claire nodded, her voice dropping to a whisper. "They didn't want you distracted. Thought if you found out you had a kid, you'd ditch the company for him. Charles said something about keeping you in line. I think they've been planning this for a while." Jack's vision blurred, rage boiling up so fast he could barely breathe. He grabbed the folder, flipping it open. There it was, in black and white. Ethan Carter, his son. 23 years stolen. And now this? The board, his own damn people, had lied to him, manipulated him, taken something he couldn't get back. He shoved the folder aside, standing so fast the chair skidded back. "They stole my son from me, Claire," he said, voice low and lethal. "Time I can't replace. They're done." "Jack, wait," she started, but he was already grabbing his jacket, storming out. He didn't care about the consequences. He needed to see them, needed to make them pay. Sullivan Enterprises' boardroom was all polished wood and cold light, the kind of place where deals were made and lives were ruined. Charles Decker sat at the head of the table, his silver hair slicked back, a smug little smile on his face. Ellen Hayes was next to him, her sharp eyes tracking Jack as he barged in, the folder slamming onto the table with a crack. "Explain this," Jack said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. Charles leaned back, unfazed. "Good to see you too, Jack. What's got you so worked up?" "Don't play dumb," Jack snapped, pointing at the folder. "You falsified a paternity test, lied to me, kept my kid from me. For what? To keep me on a leash?" Ellen sighed, folding her hands. "Jack, you're overreacting. We were protecting the company." "Protecting?" Jack laughed, short and bitter. "You stole 23 years from me, from my son, and you've got the balls to call that protection?" Charles's smile faded, his tone hardening. "You've built an empire, Jack. We couldn't risk you throwing it away over some bar kid. Stability matters. Shareholders matter. You were losing focus." "Losing focus?" Jack leaned forward, palms flat on the table. "I spent my life thinking success was control. Building this place, keeping everything locked down. But you owned me, didn't you? Pulled strings like I was your damn puppet." Ellen didn't flinch. "You're being dramatic. This company's bigger than your personal life. We did what we had to." Jack straightened, shaking his head. "You're done. Both of you. I'm out." The room went still. Charles frowned, leaning forward. "What?" "I'm resigning," Jack said, the words lighter than he'd expected. "You'll have it in writing by morning. Run your empire without me." Ellen's voice sharpened. "You can't just walk away, Jack." "Watch me," he said, turning for the door. Their protests erupted behind him, angry, overlapping, but he didn't stop. He was done letting them control him, done letting anyone control him. But the board wasn't the only fight he had left. He found Sarah at the Rusty Note that night, dragging Ethan out mid-set. The bar was packed, the air thick with smoke and sweat, Zydeco blaring from the jukebox. Ethan was at the piano, Tommy strumming beside him, when Sarah stormed in, her face a mask of fury. Jack pushed through the crowd just as she grabbed Ethan's arm. "Mom, what the hell?" Ethan said, pulling back. "I'm in the middle of—" "We're leaving," she snapped, her eyes flicking to Jack. "Now." Ethan clocked him, confusion creasing his face. "Jack, what's going on?" Sarah whirled on Jack, her voice shaking. "You went behind my back, didn't you? Got a DNA test?" Jack froze, the crowd's noise fading to a dull roar. "Sarah, listen." "No, you listen." She cut him off, stepping closer, You had no right. None. And now you've got Claire sniffing around, digging into our lives. Stay away from us, Jack. I mean it. Ethan's eyes widened. Wait, a DNA test? What's she talking about? Jack took a breath, meeting his gaze. I had to know, Ethan. The test said you weren't mine, but it was fake. The board screwed with it. You're my son. The bar went quiet. Or maybe it just felt that way. Ethan stared at him, mouth half open, then let out a shaky laugh. You're kidding, right? This is some messed up prank? It's not, Jack said, voice steady. I just found out today. I swear. Sarah's face twisted, anger and something deeper, pain maybe, flashing through. You don't get to drop this on him like it's nothing. You weren't there, Jack. You don't get to claim him now. I didn't know, Jack said, desperation creeping in. You told me the baby was gone. I believed you. She flinched, but her voice stayed hard. And I believed you'd never come back. Looks like we were both wrong. Tommy shoved forward, planting himself between Jack and Ethan. Back off, man. You're not welcome here. Tommy, chill, Ethan said, but his voice was shaky now, the grin gone. I need a second to— No, Sarah said, grabbing his arm again. We're done here. Let's go. Ethan hesitated, looking at Jack, really looking at him, like he was searching for something. Then he shook his head and followed Sarah out, Tommy trailing behind with a glare that could have started a fire. Jack stood there, the crowd parting around him, the jukebox kicking back in with a wail. He'd lost them. Ethan, Sarah, the company, all of it, gone in a day. He stumbled to the bar, sinking onto a stool, the bartender sliding a bourbon over without a word. He'd wanted the truth, and now he had it. Ethan was his son, his flesh and blood, but knowing didn't fix anything. It just broke everything wider open. Sarah hated him. Ethan didn't trust him. The board had played him like a damn fiddle, and here he was, alone again, the same way he'd started. He downed the bourbon, the burn sharp and empty. The rain picked up outside, hammering the windows like it was trying to get in. He'd walked away from Sullivan Enterprises, but where the hell did that leave him? With a son who didn't want him and a past he couldn't undo. Jack set the glass down, staring at his reflection in the bar's scratched mirror. He didn't recognize the guy looking back, tired, hollow, lost. He'd hit bottom, and for the first time in years he didn't know how to climb out. Jack's world just imploded. Talk about a rough day. What's he gonna do next? Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment with your predictions. I'm dying to know what you think. Next part's coming, and it's gonna turn everything around, so don't miss it. Jack didn't sleep after that night at the Rusty Note. The bourbon hadn't helped, just left him with a headache and a gnawing pit in his gut. He'd walked away from Sullivan Enterprises, burned bridges with Sarah and Ethan, and now he was sitting in his penthouse, staring at a city that didn't feel like his anymore. The rain had stopped, but the air was still heavy, the Mississippi River glinting under a pale morning sun. He'd hit rock bottom, and for the first time in years, he didn't have a plan. His phone buzzed on the coffee table, Claire's name flashing. He almost ignored it, but something made him pick up. Yeah? Jack, you need to get down here, she said, her voice urgent. Now, Sullivan Enterprises. I've got something you'll want to hear. He rubbed his face, exhaustion weighing him down. I'm done with that place, Claire. Whatever it is. It's about Ethan, she cut in. And Sarah. Trust me, you're not done yet. That got him moving. 20 minutes later, he was in the lobby of Sullivan Enterprises, the glass walls and marble floors feeling like a cage he'd just escaped. Claire met him by the elevators, her blazer wrinkled like she'd been up all night too. She didn't waste time, pulling him into a quiet corner. I found something, she said, handing him a stack of papers. Emails between Charles and Maggie Bennett, Sarah's mom. Jack frowned, flipping through them. Maggie? What's she got to do with this? Everything, Claire said. She's the one who pushed Charles to fake the DNA test. Look, back in '01 she wrote to him, begging him to keep you away from Sarah. Said you'd ruin her life if you knew about the baby. Charles owed her a favor from way back, some real estate deal, and he cashed it in by rigging the test. Jack's head spun, the words blurring on the page. Maggie did this? Why? She didn't trust you, Claire said. Thought you'd drag Sarah into your world and leave her high and dry. When you started sniffing around Ethan, she panicked. Called Charles again. He and Ellen jumped on it. Figured it'd keep you focused on the company. He sank against the wall, the papers crumpling in his hand. Maggie. Sarah's mom had orchestrated this whole damn thing, kept him in the dark for 23 years, and Charles had played along, turning it into a weapon. So Sarah didn't know? Claire shook her head. Not about the test. Maggie fed her the same lie she fed you, that the baby was gone. Sarah thought you'd moved on. Jack's throat tightened. All this time he'd blamed Sarah, and she'd blamed him, when the real puppet master was her own mother. He'd lost decades with his son because of it. I need to tell them, he said, voice rough. Ethan deserves the truth. Sarah, too. Claire nodded. Then go. I'll handle things here. Charles and Ellen won't know what hit him. He didn't ask what she meant. He just left, the papers stuffed in his jacket, and drove straight to the rusty note. It was early, too early for a crowd, but Ethan was there, alone, tinkering with the piano. The bar smelled like last night's beer and bleach, the jukebox silent for once. Ethan glanced up, his usual smirk nowhere in sight. You again. Mom said to tell you to get lost. I know, Jack said, stepping closer. But I'm not here to fight. I need to talk to you. And Sarah. Where is she? Ethan hesitated, fingers pausing on the keys. Home. Why? Because you're my son, Jack said, pulling out the papers. And this proves it. The test was fake. Your grandma and my board cooked it up to keep us apart. I didn't know, Ethan, I swear. Ethan stared at the papers, then at Jack, his face a mix of shock and disbelief. You're serious? Dead serious, Jack said. I quit the company yesterday. Walked away from it all. I just want a shot with you. Blood or not, I don't care. But it turns out it is blood. Ethan let out a shaky laugh, running a hand through his hair. This is nuts, man. You're telling me my whole life's been a lie? Not your life, Jack said. Just the part about me. Let's go see your mom. She needs to hear this too. Ethan nodded, still dazed, and followed him out. They drove to Sarah's place in Gentilly, a little shotgun house with peeling paint and a porch sagging under potted plants. She was in the kitchen when they walked in, the smell of chicory coffee hitting them hard. Her eyes narrowed at Jack, but softened when she saw Ethan's face. "What's going on?" she asked, setting down a mug. Jack didn't waste time. "The DNA test was fake, Sarah. Maggie and Charles rigged it. Ethan's mine, and I didn't know until yesterday." Her mug slipped, shattering on the floor. "What?" "It's true," Ethan said, holding up the papers. "Grandma screwed us all over." Sarah sank into a chair, her hands shaking. "She told me you didn't want us. Said you'd paid her off to keep me quiet." "She lied," Jack said, voice soft. "To both of us. I thought you lost the baby. I never stopped caring, Sarah. I just didn't know." The room went quiet, the weight of it settling in. Sarah's eyes welled up, but she blinked it back, looking at Ethan. "You okay with this?" Ethan shrugged, a small grin breaking through. "Guess I'm stuck with him now, huh? Kinda cool having a dad who's a ex-billionaire." Jack chuckled, the tension easing just a bit. "I'm not here to buy you off, kid. I just want in." Sarah studied him, then sighed. "You're still an ass, Jack, but maybe not a total lost cause." Before they could say more, the door creaked open, and Maggie stepped in, her face paling as she saw them together. "Sarah, Don't," Sarah snapped, standing. "You kept my son from his father." "Why?" Maggie's shoulders slumped. "I thought I was protecting you." Jack was a dreamer back then, reckless, chasing big ideas. "I didn't want him breaking you." "You broke us instead," Sarah said, voice trembling. "Get out, Mama. I need time." Maggie left, the door clicking shut behind her, and the three of them stood there, the pieces finally falling into place. Jack looked at Ethan. "I've got an idea. You up for one more gig?" Ethan grinned. "Always." 2 nights later, the French Quarter was alive with a street festival. Lanterns strung across St. Anne Street, the air thick with jazz and the smell of beignets. Ethan had pulled some strings with his musician buddies, setting up an outdoor stage near Jackson Square. The crowd was huge. Locals, tourists, even a few stragglers from the Rusty Note, cheering as Ethan took the mic. "This one's personal," he said, tapping it with a grin. "A lullaby my mom taught me, and my dad wrote. Stick around, 'cause we're doing it together." Jack stepped up, nerves jangling, but Ethan's nod steadied him. Sarah was there too, off to the side, sketching the scene on a canvas, her way of joining in. They started the lullaby, Jack's hands shaky at first, but Ethan's easy rhythm pulled him along. The notes floated out, soft and warm, weaving through the night air. The crowd hushed, caught in it, and for once, Jack didn't care about perfection, just the feeling of it. Him and his son, side by side. When they finished, the applause roared, but Jack barely heard it. He looked at Ethan, then at Sarah, who gave him a small, real smile, the first in 25 years. They stepped off the stage, and Ethan clapped him on the back. "Not bad, Dad." Jack laughed, the word hitting him hard and good. "You either, kid." Later, they sat at Sarah's kitchen table, a pot of gumbo between them, the radio playing soft jazz. It wasn't fancy. No chandeliers, no $1 million deals, just them, a family pieced together from years of mess. Jack raised his glass. "To starting over." Ethan smirked, clinking his. to not sucking at it. Sarah rolled her eyes but joined in. To us. They drank, and for the first time in a long damn time, Jack felt like he was exactly where he belonged. What a ride, huh? If this ending hit you in the feels, smash that like button and subscribe for more stories like Jack's. Drop a comment. What's your favorite moment? See you in the next one.